be able to talk to you about this? How would you recommend they go about it?
Like asking for like my address or my phone number, like my location share. Or I could just location share you, and then we could.
An actor who does press for a movie about such a serious topic, you gotta talk about it.
Right.
And oftentimes, that's as much as we love doing fun interviews with these actors and kind of having that moment. I always sort of use the bar of let the tone of the movie set the tone for the interview.
When the courtroom calendar flipped to summary judgment day, no one expected Hollywood's golden glow to dim quite this fast. Yet here we are, standing inside a legal battlefield where Blake Lively's lawsuit, once presented as explosive, now trembles under a mountain of counter-arguments. And if the summary judgment gets granted in full, and yes, John, that's still an if, the ending of Blake's legal storm might not be a cinematic climax. It might just be a silent thud, because Wayfair Studios and the co-defendants, Jamie Heath, Justin Baldoni, Jen Abel, Melissa Nathan, and Steve Sarowitz, didn't step into this fight gently. They came in swinging, fully armed, dropping evidence like Hollywood drops teasers, dramatic, bold, and relentless. And the first shot fired? A detailed breakdown of why Blake's lawsuit doesn't meet legal requirements for sexual harassment claims, why she wasn't a contractual employee, why she operated as an independent contractor, why she never signed her main agreement, and why, interestingly, she allegedly held more control over production than the very people she's accusing. This wasn't a casual response. This was a legal weapon, polished, sharpened, and delivered with over 200 attachments of evidence. That's not normal for Hollywood drama. This is a kind of arsenal you prepare for war. Most of these documents were filed under seal, but only for a week. Then Blake has to stand up and decide what stays sealed and what gets exposed to the world. And here's the twist. Wayfair already told the judge that everything should be public, even Blake's deposition. Yes, even that. And the judge? He's not exactly someone who loves secrecy. He's unsealed documents before. Because in an explosive high-stakes case, the public has the right to know which evidence shapes the final verdict. Wayfair is basically saying, we want everything open. And honestly, nothing Blake sealed is truly confidential. And to prove how confident they are, Justin, Jamie, Jen, Melissa, and Steve voluntarily unsealed their own deposition transcripts. Not snippets. Not carefully crafted summaries. Whole chunks of their sworn testimony. Open for the world. Hollywood rarely lets secrets slip. This week, secrets aren't slipping. They're spilling. One of the most shocking power moves in this document comes from the author, Alexander Shapiro. This isn't a rant, not a PR clapback, nothing emotional. This is a cold, clean, surgical legal dissection. Their tactic isn't, Blake made this up, or Blake is lying. Instead, they lock onto a different strategy. Even if everything Blake says happened, it still doesn't meet the legal standard for sexual harassment. That's a deadly approach. Because it removes emotion. It removes victim-blaming accusations. It removes the optics that Justin was criticized for earlier. Does her story legally qualify as SH under federal law? Does it meet severity? Does it meet pervasiveness? Was it gender-based? Was she harmed professionally? Did the studio fail to act? And again, they claim the answer is their strongest argument? In sexual harassment cases, power imbalance is everything. But in this story, Wayfair flips the script. They say Blake wasn't a vulnerable one. She was the most powerful force on set. Here's how they paint the picture. She was an immensely powerful A-list actress. She had creative demands. She objected to moments on set, and they immediately fixed them. She controlled major elements of production. She allegedly held more authority than the defendants. They claim she objected to certain behavior during early filming. But those concerns were heard, respected, and immediately accommodated. After that, they say filming continued with zero issues. She allegedly praised the environment. Even her own then lawyers said no formal HR action was needed. And here's where the story turns. Months later, after the film wrapped, she allegedly began asserting creative control over the movie in a way that the defendants describe as aggressive. According to their filing, she allegedly tried minimizing Justin Baldoni's role. She allegedly communicated with the Producers Guild, challenging credits. She allegedly pressured Sony to adjust or remove Justin's byline. She allegedly attempted to control press, marketing, and the premiere guest list. And the most explosive claim, she allegedly tried to get Justin excluded from the premiere. That's not a small accusation. That's Hollywood warfare. So Justin, from their perspective, panicked. He saw an actor with massive influence allegedly erasing him from a narrative of his own movie. And that's when According to them, Justin did something many studio heads and celebrities do. He hired crisis PR, not to attack Blake, but to protect himself, the film, and Wayfair Studios. That's their argument. And legally, it's a strong one. White medium star, this is a Hollywood reputation fight, not a legal case. Wayfair argues, this is not a case about sexual harassment. This is not a case about retaliation. This is not a case about discrimination, not a violation of federal law. They say nothing Blake described is illegal. Awkward? Sure. Annoying? Possibly. Unprofessional? Sometimes. But legally? Harassment? Retaliation? Defamation? They argue none of it qualifies. One of the most powerful pieces in this entire avalanche of paperwork is this. Blake claims there was a sophisticated smear campaign against her. Wayfair responds with, 0 false stories were created by them. 0 bots were used. 0 fake accounts were run. 0 defamatory statements came from their side. They say every negative moment Blake experienced online came from. They say Justin promoting good press about himself is not retaliation. Trying to suppress false rumors is not retaliation. Directing journalists to existing news is not retaliation. And legally, courts agree. They even bring up federal cases where defendants leaked to the National Enquirer and still weren't considered retaliators. And the knockout punch? Blake never sued any of the PR professionals. Never sued the talent agency. Never sued the people she accused of spinning narratives. If she truly believed they defamed her, the question becomes, why no defamation lawsuit? The defendants go point by point, breaking down each allegation and comparing it with federal precedents. They argue, hugging isn't gender-based harassment if men and women were hugged equally. Being shown a birth video isn't sexual harassment if it was shown to everyone, including male colleagues. Awkward comment about appearance don't reach severe and pervasive standards. Words like sexy on a film about romance and intimacy aren't automatically sexism. If Blake herself used similar language, it's not discriminatory. They cite past cases where bartenders witnessed sexual acts in front of them. Writers on TV shows heard graphic sexual jokes daily. Teachers experienced crude bets and explicit comments. And still courts ruled, not harassment, not gender-based, not illegal. 1. You complained about harassment. 2. You faced punishment because of that complaint. 3. The punishment was significant. 4. The timing lines up, her concerns were resolved, she kept filming, she got more creative control. Nothing happened for 8 months. Then the publicity battle began, but by then, she herself allegedly ignited public drama, so legally, the timeline doesn't match retaliation. Not even close. The facts aren't disputed, the behavior wasn't illegal, the timeline breaks her retaliation claim, her contractor status disqualifies her claim, and no reasonable jury could side with her. Then summary judgment could end the case before it ever reaches trial. No jury, no witness stand, no dramatic showdown, just a quiet legal ending. A thud. Everything Blake Lively labeled as harassment, retaliation, or a smear campaign has been contradicted by discovery evidence. Think of this as an X-ray of Hollywood politics, peeling back the layers of emails, texts, depositions, and internal communications that expose reality. What seemed like a glamorous scandal in the headlines is actually a textbook case of misperception, legal misunderstanding, and PR maneuvering. A few awkward comments, miscommunications on set, minor personal boundary issues, situations arising during high-pressure creative production, none of this qualifies as legally actionable harassment. The law is crystal clear. Harassment must be tied to gender. Discovery showed that many of the incidents Blake cited were experienced by men and women alike. Compliments, jokes, and casual physical contact happened broadly on set. Exposure to certain videos or discussions wasn't directed only at her. Conversations about consent and sexual themes were routine for everyone, not gender-targeted if it's not gender-specific. It cannot legally be sexual harassment. Blake's entire harassment claim rests on a foundation with no legal support. Superficially dramatic, but hollow beneath the surface. Wayfair didn't ignore or dismiss them. Corrective actions were immediate and documented. On-set behavior was adjusted after the interventions. No similar issues occurred. Legal filings emphasize. After these measures, no further similar conduct occurred. In legal terms, this is devastating for any harassment claim. If the allegations were legitimate, a single intervention would not have resolved them. Reality check. The swift remediation proves a company acted responsibly and effectively, dismantling the notion of ongoing abuse. Justin Baldoni used PR to retaliate against me. Drama alert. Sound intense. Sound like a viral story. Sound like a perfect scandal. But reality bites. The supposed retaliatory actions occurred 8 months after Blake's initial complaints. Legally, that's too long to establish a causal link. Retaliation claims require close timing or direct cause-effect evidence. This gap kills the argument. Documents showed Justin's PR actions were triggered by Blake excluding him from premiere, negative media narratives forming around him, public misrepresentation of his role. In the film, the potential for permanent damage to a professional reputation. Simply put, he was protecting himself, the studio, and the film, not retaliating. Filing language is sharp. Baldoni's PR efforts were a response to incoming negative press, not to plaintiff's past complaints. In legal terms, this distinction is fatal for the retaliation claim. Fake accounts and bots, anonymous media leaks, targeted social media manipulation, coordinated Hollywood whisper networks discovery revealed zero evidence. No bots, no secret accounts, no payments to manipulate coverage, no hidden PR campaigns. PR work focused purely on image management. In short, the smear campaign existed only in Blake's imagination. Legally, defending oneself publicly is not actionable retaliation, even if it hurts feelings or public perception. Specific names, dates, communications, or email, financial, or IP records, evidence linking actions directly to defendant's discovery confirmed she had none of these. Legal reality. A claim without evidence is a story, not a case. And courts only respond to proof, not perception. Defense filed strongly. Remove her assumptions. There is no case left. Harsh, but legally irrefutable. Blake Lively was not an employee, but an independent contractor. Employment laws covering harassment, retaliation, and anti-discrimination largely do not apply to contractors. Her failure to sign the full actor loan-out agreement made her claims unenforceable. Blake exercised significant control over filming schedules, scene selection, script revisions, production decisions, direct communication with studios. Her own PGA letter confirmed she wielded authority. Legal implication. If she was in control, she cannot claim a power imbalance. And as an independent contractor, most workplace protections legally do not apply. Discovery and filings paint a different picture. High-pressure production environment, creative disagreements, personality clashes, misunderstandings, and miscommunication. Public scrutiny and intense fan/media attention. This was a professional conflict amplified by Hollywood optics, not a legally actionable case. No material facts are disputed. Therefore, the case should end without trial. Facts are documented, timelines are clear, evidence is absent. Laws do not support claims, contractor status is undeniable, alleged PR campaigns are fictional, harassment claims fail the severity threshold, retaliation claims are legally impossible, court precedent is on their side. If there is no factual dispute, a trial is unnecessary. Bottom line, even if feelings were hurt, subjective perception is not a legal violation. Cold, brutal, but legally precise. And it paints the case exactly as it stands. One of perception versus law, drama versus enforceable reality. The narrative surrounding Blake Lively's lawsuit against Wayfair and associated parties has captured the imagination of both legal analysts and the public alike. But behind the headlines lies a far more intricate story, one that reveals not only the fragile legal footing of the claims, but also the profound disconnect between perception and reality in high-stakes Hollywood disputes. From the filings, discovery documents, and motions submitted by the defense, a clear picture emerges. Blake Lively cannot establish proximate cause. The defense argues that it is utterly unreasonable to suggest that Wayfair or any related parties would have mobilized PR professionals to manage reputations in response to allegations made 8 months prior. The legal concept of proximate cause is simple in theory, but often decisive in practice. It requires that the alleged harm be directly traceable to the plaintiff's protected actions. In this case, the defense asserts that the PR responses were a reaction to Lively's public attacks against them, not to any prior conduct on set. According to the filings, the defendants had every legitimate interest in protecting their reputations and the reception of the film, especially after Lively allegedly isolated Justin Baldoni from the cast and snubbed him at the premiere. Any suggestion that PR actions were retaliatory, therefore, is legally untenable. The defense emphasizes that even if Lively believed her actions triggered a response, the causal link is broken by temporal distance and by the legitimate motives of self-protection exercised by the defendants. This argument strikes at the very heart of her retaliation claims. Retaliation under law requires a proximate temporal link between a protected activity and an adverse action. A delay of 8 months, punctuated by unrelated motivations, undermines any inference of causation. In other words, the defense contends even if Lively were correct about the adverse reaction, it had nothing to do with her prior complaints. The legal term used repeatedly, in the filings is. But for causation, the idea that the harm must have occurred because of protected activity. The defense dismantles this claim with methodical precision, highlighting that the defendant's actions were consistent with ordinary reputation management in the entertainment industry. Beyond causation, the filings focus sharply on a second critical legal point. Blake Lively was not an employee under Title VII, the federal law that governs sexual harassment claims. Title VII is specifically designed to address the abuse of power within employer-employee relationships. Independent contractor, by contrast, are largely outside its protective scope. The defense highlights multiple facets of Lively's status that render her ineligible for these protections. Extraordinary control over work conditions. Lively negotiated terms that gave her the power to determine filming locations, schedules, and even script elements. She led meetings at her personal residence and insisted on terms without which she refused to proceed. Creative authority. As an A-list actor, she was the primary instrumentality of her role, with significant discretion over how her performance would be executed. The PGA letter she submitted further reinforces that she exercised substantial control over production. Contractual independence. Lively's engagement was limited to a single project. She negotiated her own payment schedule, benefits, and even selection of personal assistants and security. She was not integrated into the business in a manner typical of an employee. Financial responsibility. Taxes were handled independently. She was paid through her loan-out entity, not as a standard W-2 employee. The legal implication is stark. Without an employer-employee relationship, Title VII sexual harassment protections do not apply, and any claim built on the premise of a power imbalance becomes fundamentally unsustainable. Lively's star power, the filings argue, gave her the upper hand, not the disadvantage necessary to establish a harassment claim. A major turning point in the defense's strategy is the contractual analysis. Central to the case is the Actor Loan-Out Agreement, ELA, a document Lively never signed. While ancillary agreements exist, including a contract writer agreement, CRA, these are integrated into the unexecuted ELA. In essence, the defense argues that an unsigned contract cannot be enforced. Ongoing negotiations. Both parties continued to negotiate material terms until July 24th, yet no final agreement was ever reached. Offer letter versus ALA. Lively's offer letter, executed in May, represents the only binding agreement. However, this letter does not contain the provisions Lively claims were breached. Ancillary agreements. The CRA and similar documents were intended to supplement the unexecuted ALA. They cannot be enforced independently because their existence presupposes a final, executed main agreement. This legal argument is reinforced by conditions precedent language in the drafts, demonstrating the parties' intent not to be bound absent full execution. Even if the ancillary agreements were considered valid, the defense notes multiple reasons why enforcement would still fail, including improper notice requirements, contractual limitations on damages, and exclusions related to speculative losses. Notice periods. Complaints must be formally presented, allowing the company a defined time to cure issues. Cure period compliance. Wayfair and associated entities applied protective measures promptly and effectively. Once Lively raised concerns, the environment was adjusted to her satisfaction. The defense emphasizes that she never filed a formal HR claim, which undermines allegations of negligence or failure to investigate. In practical terms, there was nothing left for Wayfair to investigate. Protective measures were already in place, and Lively later agreed that the environment was acceptable. Wayfair is not the alter ego of EW. EW was a production company managing the specific film, separated for liability and financial management. Claims improperly filed against Wayfair fail because a contractual relationship existed solely with EW. This distinction is crucial. Misidentifying contractual party undermines both breach and damages claims, as the correct corporate entity was never properly sued. Exclusion of indirect damages. Claims for lost profits from non-parties, such as external businesses in which Lively held a minor interest, are impermissible. Courts routinely reject attempts to recover corporate damages indirectly through individual claims. Speculative losses. Many claimed harms involve projections of potential future earnings, rather than realized financial harm. The defense asserts that such damages cannot be recovered under established law. Contractual caps. Even if contractual breaches existed, agreements limited recoverable damages to specific, agreed-upon losses. Punitive damages and triple damages are barred. The cumulative effect is that Lively's alleged harms are legally unquantifiable and contractually limited, further weakening her case. Severity and pervasiveness. For harassment to meet the legal threshold, conduct must be severe or pervasive enough to alter employment conditions. Lively's claims, according to filings, fall short. Employee status. As discussed, she was not an employee, removing Title VII protections. Power dynamics. The filings highlight Lively's extraordinary control over production, contradicting any claim of subordination. By combining these elements, the defense dismantles the legal foundation of her harassment claims point by point. As the Blake Lively lawsuit against Wayfair and associated parties progresses, the focus shifts from theoretical legal vulnerabilities to tactical execution in court. Examines the defense's summary judgment motion, the evidentiary strategy, and how procedural nuances in contract law, corporate structure, and litigation privilege could decisively shape the case. No employment relationship. The defense reiterates that Lively was an independent contractor, not an employee. Title VII protections and claims of sexual harassment are predicated on employment status, and without it, her claims are legally inapplicable. Adverse action. To sustain a retaliation claim, there must be a demonstrable adverse action. The defense argues that all responses by Wayfair were legitimate and protective, rather than retaliatory. Any PR activity or managerial response occurred as routine business practice, not in response to Lively's protected activities. Unsigned contractual documents. The actor loan-out agreement, ELA, was never executed. Ancillary agreements like the Contract Writer Agreement, CRA, were intended only to supplement the ALA. The defense emphasizes that unsigned agreements cannot form a basis for enforceable contractual claims, and thus breach claims fail at the outset. Procedural and notice deficiencies. Even if agreements were enforceable, the filings note that Lively failed to follow required procedures for complaint notice and cure periods. Without adherence to these procedural requirements, her claims cannot legally move forward. Incorrect party named. Lively sued Wayfair instead of the actual contractual party. And with us, EWU. Wayfair was not her employer, nor was it acting as an alter ego of EWU. Corporate separation is common in film production to manage liability, financing, and budgeting, and courts typically uphold these distinctions. By structuring their summary judgment motion around these 5 points, Wayfair effectively targets every foundational element of Lively's lawsuit. The defense submitted an enormous volume of evidence to support their arguments, reportedly over 200 exhibits spanning nearly 1,000 pages. This evidence is central to their attempt to establish undisputed facts, which is a requirement for summary judgment. Emails and communications. Correspondence demonstrating Lively's extensive control over filming decision schedules and production logistics. These show she dictated terms at nearly every step. PGA letter. Lively's own letter to the Producers Guild of America documents her creative authority and oversight responsibilities, effectively contradicting her claims of vulnerability or subordination. Offer letter and financial records. Documents illustrating her negotiated fee, bonus structure, and escrow arrangements highlight her independence and negotiation leverage. They also show she assumed financial responsibility for taxes, further separating her from the status of an employee. Draft agreements and contract negotiations. The unexecuted ALA and CRA drafts show ongoing negotiation, further demonstrating that no final agreement was reached, supporting the defense's argument that breach claims are legally impossible. Production notes and set documentation. Evidence of Lively's influence over locations, script changes, and personnel assignments underscores her control over the production environment. These exhibits serve multiple purposes. They illustrate undisputed facts, highlight Lively's autonomy, and demonstrate the lack of an adverse employment action necessary for a retaliation claim. In essence, the defense is building a narrative. Lively was not a subordinate employee. She had extraordinary control, and any alleged harm cannot be causally linked to protected activity. Wayfair and associated parties contend that any statements or actions made in response to Lively's public commentary were defensive rather than retaliatory. The filings emphasize that speaking to defend one's reputation is protected, even if it is perceived as negative by the opposing party. This is particularly relevant in the defamation context. The defense invokes the litigation privilege, which generally protects communications made in connection with legal proceedings from claims of defamation or retaliation. By framing responses to Lively's actions as constitutionally protected, the defense reinforces the argument that no legal harm could have resulted, even if one accepted her narrative at face value. Power dynamics. A key element of harassment claims is an imbalance of power. Evidence shows Lively exercised control over nearly every aspect of production, which negates claims of vulnerability or coercion. Severity and pervasiveness. Harassment must be severe or pervasive enough to alter working conditions. The defense maintains that Lively controlled the set and production environment, leaving little room for actions that could rise to the standard. Employment status. As repeatedly highlighted, Title VII protections do not apply to independent contractors. Without an employer-employee relationship, harassment claims lack legal standing. These points collectively undermine the legal foundation of Lively's harassment and retaliation claims. Unsigned contracts. The ALA was never executed, and ancillary agreements like the CRA cannot be enforced independently. This undercuts any breach claims. Conditions precedent. Drafts explicitly require full execution before binding obligations arise, which did not occur. Offer letter. While May 2023 offer letter was signed, it does not include the provisions she claims were breached. Any attempt to rely on ancillary agreements is therefore legally futile. Cure periods and notice requirements. Even if a breach existed, Lively's failure to comply with required notice periods and to give Wayfair an opportunity to cure nullifies claims. Damages limitations. Contract included caps on damages and barred punitive claims. Speculative losses, indirect corporate damages, and profits from unrelated entities are explicitly excluded, severely limiting potential recovery. The filings portray Lively as attempting to enforce provisions that were never formally agreed upon, a point the defense underscores repeatedly. Incorrect defendant. Lively sued Wayfair rather than EWU, a procedural misstep that could doom parts of her case. Corporate formality. The separation of entities is standard in film production to manage financial risk, liability, and project-specific budgeting. Courts routinely respect this separation. Alter ego arguments. Lively cannot establish that Wayfair acted as EW's alter ego. Therefore, claims against Wayfair are procedurally and substantively flawed. In short, the filings argue that the lawsuit targets the wrong party, creating a fundamental barrier to recovery. Non-party losses. She attempts to recover profits from businesses in which she has a minor or indirect interest. Courts generally reject such claims, as damages must directly impact the plaintiff. Speculative profits. Many of her claimed damages are projections or assumptions about potential earnings. The defense stresses that courts require actual, demonstrable harm. Contractual exclusions. Her contract limited damages to specific, realized losses. Punitive or triple damages are barred. This meticulous dissection suggests that even if Lively prevailed on liability, her financial recovery would be minimal, if any. Conspiracy. Lively alleges conspiracy among the defendants, but the filings argue there is no evidence of coordinated unlawful action. Defamation. Statements made in defense of legal claims and corporate reputation are protected under the litigation privilege. Defamation claims therefore fail as a matter of law. False light. In New York, false light claims are generally not recognized. The defense invokes this as a statutory barrier to recovery. By systematically attacking these claims, the defense aims to strip Lively's case of peripheral theories that might otherwise complicate proceedings. PGA letter and production documentation establishes Lively's control over production, undermining harassment and retaliation claims. Offer letter and escrow documentation reinforces independent contractor status and contractual clarity. Emails and negotiation records shows ongoing dialogue regarding contract terms, highlighting that no final agreement was reached. Witness testimony and declarations substantiates claims regarding production practices, notice compliance, and corporate separation. The defense's approach is to create a comprehensive, undisputed factual record that leaves the court with minimal ambiguity. Disputed facts. Lively will attempt to introduce her own exhibits and testimony, disputing key points regarding her control, treatment, and communications. Procedural arguments. She may argue that contractual clauses or notice requirements do not bar her claims. Harassment narrative. Lively may reinforce her narrative of sexual harassment and retaliation, attempting to show adverse action and temporal causation. The filings anticipate these counterarguments, which is why the defense emphasizes multiple alternative grounds for dismissal. Even if one argument is rejected, others remain to support summary judgment. Employment status and Title VII limitations, contractual authority, execution, and procedural compliance, corporate structure, and proper party identification, damages limitations, and exclusion of speculative losses, protection of reputation, and First Amendment defenses taken together. These points create a multi-layered defense designed to challenge both the legal and factual foundation of Lively's lawsuit. The filings demonstrate meticulous preparation, leveraging documentary evidence, procedural rules, and statutory protections to build a comprehensive case for dismissal. What emerges is a portrait of a lawsuit complicated by celebrity status, independent contractor law, and corporate nuance. The defense does not merely argue that Lively is wrong. They argue that the case is legally unsustainable on every level, from employment law to contract law to damages recovery.